Hi there, this is Al24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next, Now News program. Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs of the French Republic, Jean-Yves Le Drian, has started a working visit to Algeria this morning to discuss bilateral relations. In our news file, we'll be discussing with our political expert the rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine top the two-tour high-stakes virtual conference between President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden. Australian government follows the same footsteps of the United States and New Zealand in boycotting the next Olympic Games held in China. And finally, a Malaysian appeals court upheld former Prime Minister Najib Razak's guilty verdict in a case linked to a corruption scandal. Hello again and welcome. The Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs of the French Republic, Jean-Yves Le Drian, has started a working visit to Algeria this morning to discuss bilateral relations. He was received by Algerian counterpart Ramtan Lamamra at the Foreign Affairs Ministry here in Algiers. This visit comes after an unprecedented diplomatic spat between the two countries. Russian President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden held a two-hour high-stakes virtual conference Tuesday in which they discussed the rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine that have stirred fears of a possible war. Zahra Farjani.
Joe Biden and Russian President Vladimir Putin held a virtual summit that lasted roughly 2 hours in hopes of easing tensions between Russia and Ukraine. According to the White House's readout of the conversation, Biden shared deep concerns about Russia's increased troop presence along the country's border with Ukraine, which has sparked fears of a potential invasion. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan at U.S. press briefing said Biden urged Putin to embrace de-escalation and diplomacy towards Ukraine.
And we believe that we are seeing a common threat picture here, and our message to our friends in the Ukrainian government, as our message was today to President Putin, is that the United States supports the Minsk process, wants to see progress made towards a ceasefire, towards confidence-building measures, and that is the best way forward. There is a tasking coming out of that meeting by the two presidents to their teams to start talking about how we might think about the diplomatic path. The president made clear throughout that diplomacy has to come in the context of de-escalation rather than escalation, and now we will watch what unfolds in the coming days.
The two presidents tasked their team to follow up, and the U.S. will do so in close coordination with allies and partners. Russia's spokesman Dmitry Peskov is now claiming Russia has no plans to attack nor invade Ukraine. However, what counts is whether troops and tanks back away. Usually, important meetings between leaders deliver at least a few minor agreements, but this call might not if Biden hangs tough.
Ukraine's Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov warned that Russian invasion of Ukraine would mean a truly bloody massacre. Moscow, in turn, demanded a guarantee from Kiev not to attack the regions in the far east of the country, known collectively as Donbass, which are controlled by pro-Russian separatists. Hussein Berkan.
Ukrainian Defense Minister Oleksiy Reznikov has stated that there will be a really bloody massacre if Russia decides to invade Ukraine, and warned that Russian guys also will come back in the coffins, amid higher alarm about troop movements on the nation's borders.
I will not believe that Russia will have a victory in Ukraine. It's a different, because it will be a really bloody massacre. And Russian guys also will come back in the coffins, yes.
For its part, Dmitry Peskov, Kremlin spokesperson, stated that rhetoric from the West is hostile and that Russian position is clear and needs to start negotiating guarantees with the West.
There is a certain crisis situation with Ukraine. We see aggressive and hostile rhetoric coming from the European capitals and Washington. Putin has an absolutely clearly formulated position. He has spoken about the need to start negotiating on a system of guarantee.
This comes after Biden and Putin had a video call of 2 hours in an attempt to de-escalate the tensions between Russia and Ukraine.
And to talk more about the latest insights regarding this, I'm joined live via Skype by Mahfoud Ali Zoui, Algerian professor at university. Well, Mahfoud, do you think the video call conferencing between Biden and Putin is going to ease tensions between the US and Russia over Ukraine's issue?
It can be interpreted in two ways. First of all, it is an indication that tension between the two great powers is reaching a very high level. And on the other way, if we read it positively, it means also that the doors for debate and discussion between the two great powers are still open, which make the potential to limit the escalation between the two countries possible.
Finally, do you think that apart from imposing economic sanctions on Russia, was not there any other ways or options to put limits to Russia?
I think the choices are very limited. As a matter of fact, both parties are trying to impose a kind of de facto situation so that they will discuss later in terms favorable to them. The Russians want the NATO to decrease its military presence in its borders, and Americans think that it's legitimate for them to send more troops to Ukraine and even to sell Ukraine modern weaponry. So it is expected that the Americans will resort as usual to impose more economic sanctions, but the potential of war is always there.
Thank you so much, Mahfoud Ali Zoui.
I would like to thank the All 24 News so much for having me. It's always my pleasure to join you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. You joined us via Skype. And with the growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine, the EU and US are considering hard-hitting sanctions on Russian economy if Moscow orders an invasion of Ukraine. In recent weeks, multiple American media organizations have suggested that Russia is planning a military incursion into Ukraine. Zahra Farjani.
Ukraine has accused Russia of massing tens of thousands of troops near its border, raising the prospect of open war between the two neighbors. Ukraine's President Zelensky said his armed forces were capable of fighting off any Russian attack, as the country marked its National Army Day with a display of US armored vehicles and patrol boats. US President Joe Biden has vowed his unwavering support to Ukraine in its standoff with Moscow and will hold talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin to try to resolve the crisis. According to media sources, if Moscow orders an invasion of Ukraine, the EU and US would consider hard-hitting sanctions targeting major Russian banks, as well as Russian Direct Investment Fund, Moscow's Sovereign Wealth Fund, and may also attempt to make it harder for investors to buy Russian debt on the secondary market. As stated in media sources, American officials are even discussing disconnecting the country from the SWIFT banking network. This would be by far the strongest sanction ever placed on Russia and would significantly affect the lives of ordinary citizens. Russia, on its behalf, ridiculed the report and suggested that it is being hyped up through the media, denying any intention to invade Ukraine. The Kremlin said that any troop movements are an internal matter and of no concern to any other country.
The US Senate rejected a resolution on Tuesday that would have prohibited the proposed sale of advanced medium-range air-to-air missiles, missile launchers and other weapons and support to Saudi Arabia. The vote was 67-30 against the resolution, which was introduced by Republicans Rand Paul and Mike Lee, as well as Bernie Sanders, who co-caucuses with Democrats. While many US lawmakers consider Saudi Arabia an important partner in the Middle East, members of Congress also have criticized the country for its involvement in the war in Yemen, a conflict considered one of the world's worst humanitarian disasters. The United States slapped sanctions on a number of officials from several countries, including Iran, Syria, and Uganda, as part of claims of human rights violations and repressive actions. Sid Islam.
The United States has blacklisted individuals and entities in Iran, Syria, and Uganda, and imposed actions accusing them of being connected to serious human rights abuses and repressive acts. During the week of the United States Summit for Democracy, the Treasury Department has declared that it was targeting suppression and the weakening of democracy. Washington barred 2 senior Syrian Air Force officers and other 3 in Syria's security intelligence apparatus of being responsible for biological weapon attacks on civilians. Uganda's Chief of Military Intelligence Major General Abel Kandiyo was also blacklisted due to human rights abuses committed under his watch. The latter was disappointed by the verdict. Iran, on the other hand, was convicted by the US to be part of the accused entities in which major officials were blacklisted, including the special units of Iran's law enforcement forces and counter-terror special forces, as well as several of their officials.
Even amid Vienna talks, US cannot stop imposing sanctions against Iran. Washington fails to understand that maximum failure and a diplomatic breakthrough are mutually exclusive. Doubling down on sanctions won't create leverage and is anything but seriousness and goodwill.
Iran has slammed the United States for imposing new sanctions just days before the talks to resurrect the 2015 Iran nuclear deal resume in Vienna.
After a suspension of its membership in 2012 from the Arab League, Syria is likely to be reinstated in the next summit that will be hosted by Algeria. The readmission of Syria will be the result of Egyptian efforts as its strategic borders lie on the northern borders of Syria. This readmission will guarantee a certain balance of power in the Arab League as well as the Arab world, as Egyptian officials stated that their country is open to this readmission. Australian government follows the same stream of the United States and New Zealand in boycotting the next Olympic Games that will be held next February 2022 in China, claiming that the Chinese government has refused to sit for talks with world powers of the inhumanitarian acts that Beijing is committing on its territories on Uyghurs group. Ayedi Osama.
China's Winter Olympics are likely to be minus 3 countries on diplomacy level, as US and New Zealand announced their diplomatic boycott to the 2022 Olympic Games that would be held in China.
The Biden administration will not send any diplomatic or official representation to the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics and Paralympic Games, given the PRC's ongoing genocide and crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and other human rights abuses. The athletes on Team USA have our full support. We will be behind them 100% as we cheer them on from home, but we will not be
Today's declaration of Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison of boycotting the next February Olympics in China argued that the latter is unwilling to talk over human rights abuse conducted against Uyghurs.
The Australian government will not be sending any official representatives to the forthcoming Winter Games.
Australian Olympics Committee said the boycott will not have any effect on its athletes who are preparing to participate in the game. China on its part imposed punitive measures against Australian goods in the Chinese market, which triggered Australia's Morrison to object these measures. As a part of joining this boycott campaign, British Prime Minister's spokesman announced that his country is yet to take a final decision over whether his country will take the same stream as Australia, the USA, and New Zealand. For their part, New Zealand officials stated that their government is unwilling to sit the next pandemic talks with the Chinese government as a reaction to the Chinese officials' acts.
So we've already made clear that we won't be represented there at a ministerial level. We made that clear to China, I think, in October. And so for us, that's a decision we've already made. Range of factors, but mostly to do with COVID and the fact that the logistics of travel and so on around COVID are not conducive to that kind of.
Filippo Grandi, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, told the UN Security Council that conflict, climate change and COVID-19 have created a perfect mix of challenges facing refugees, displaced people and their hosts. He drew attention to the 39 million people living in Afghanistan. 23 million are facing extreme levels of hunger, while 3.5 million have been displaced by conflict, 700,000 this year alone. Mr. Grandi warned that the humanitarian efforts are paralyzed by conflicting political agendas, saying that the politicization of humanitarian and refugee work is another form of failure. The UN Refugee Chief Filippo Grandi also warned that the UN Security Council about the growing inability of the international community to restore peace in countries like Yemen, Libya and Ethiopia, which is forcing humanitarian and refugee organizations to work increasingly during conflicts that they can't solve despite the expectations of many people caught up in these crises. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees said his office and other organizations are dealing with about 84 million refugees who fled across borders and people displaced within their own countries, trying to provide humanitarian support and shelter and safety. Thousands of desperate Afghans were unable to flee the Taliban following the fall of Kabul because the British government's response to the crisis was disorganized and slow. The German government has reached its renewal time as this week the new designated incoming Chancellor Olaf Scholz presented the list of the government he will head for the next period. Olaf Scholz paved the way for chancellery in Germany as successor of the 16-year Chancellor Angela Merkel. Nabil Khazini.
A new three-way coalition government in Germany has appeared when Germany's environmentalist Greens approved the coalition agreement with the center-left Social Democratic Party, SPD, and the pro-business Free Democrats Party, FDP.
The big task of our political generation will be to resolve the tension between ecological questions and economic necessities. This dominates the whole coalition agreement and will be besides all other crises.
The Greens said that 86% of about 71,000 members who voted backed the accord. The SPD and the FPD each approved the alliance at special party meetings over the weekend where support exceeded 90%. Olaf Scholz called the political transition a morning for a new start. Germany's next Chancellor Olaf Scholz has presented his 7 ministerial picks for the new coalition government, with the outgoing Justice Minister Christine Lambrecht becoming the new Defense Minister. Olaf Scholz said security will be in the hands of strong women in his government. The Free Democrats leader Christian Lindner will become Finance Minister and effectively the number 3 official in the new government.
We said that we want to venture more progress, and from this week on, we want to work on progress. We have no illusions. We face great challenges.
Karl Lauterbach, a Harvard professor and a regular guest on TV talk shows, is seen as one of Germany's most trusted pandemic experts. He is expected to put his expertise to fight the current sanitary crisis Germany is facing.
We have to fight this pandemic. The pandemic will last longer than many people think, but we will manage it. The vaccination will play a central role, but not the only role. In addition to that, we will strengthen the health system. An important aim must be to bring the cases number down so far that we can recommend the travel without endangering people. We will put emphasis on that, a great emphasis.
Scholz is due to be elected as Chancellor in Parliament on Wednesday, ending the 16-year tenure of outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel. The new government will replace the grand coalition of the Conservative Christian Democratic Union and the SPD, the 2 largest party blocs in Parliament, who have dominated German politics since the end of World War II.
A senior European Union official said that talks on reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal will resume on Thursday in Vienna. France's foreign minister had said on Wednesday that talks were likely to continue, although he added he feared Iran was playing for time. Asia, the first continent to be affected by COVID-19 2 years ago, challenges are now mounting for Asian countries after measures to combat the virus has been affecting the Asian countries' economies. Nabil Khazini again.
Countries in Asia were among the first globally to be affected by COVID-19, and thus the first to start initiatives and reducing cases of ensuring long-term preparedness in the fight against the pandemic. Thailand, a country that relies on tourism for its economy, has taken its policy a step further by allowing many travelers come in the country. From early November, the country received travelers who meet basic conditions. Fully vaccinated people from 63 countries and territories who test negative upon arrival can roam Thailand without quarantine. Hong Kong has been relying on strict immigration and quarantine rules to keep itself isolated from the pandemic. Yet, economic pressures are now mounting for the territory to open its borders, and the government says its main priority is mainland China. China's zero-COVID strategy geared to prevent and contain transmission of COVID-19 domestically and from abroad. China's zero-COVID strategy relies on a rigorous system of quarantine, testing and isolation of positive cases, as well as community lockdown and travel restrictions to mitigate viral spread. The approach has been wildly successful from a public health perspective. Malaysia and China agreed to boost bilateral cooperation in developing COVID-19 vaccines and drugs. Saifuddin Abdullah, Malaysian Foreign Minister, praised China's leading role in the global fight against the pandemic. China is determined to succeed in hosting the Winter Olympic Games at a time when a new COVID-19 variant, Omicron, has been detected in many countries. Officials are confident China can reach the objective, a challenge that would be a decisive propaganda win for Beijing's zero-tolerance COVID strategy.
A Malaysian appeals court today, Wednesday, upheld former Prime Minister Najib Razak's guilty verdict in a case linked to a corruption scandal. Najib was sentenced to 12 years in prison and fined $50 million last year by a high court after being found guilty of criminal breach of trust, abuse of power and money laundering for illegally receiving about $10 million from the SRC International. His lawyer, Shafi Abdullah, told the court the former premier would appeal the verdict at the Federal Court, Malaysia's top tribunal. As a continuation for its persecution to the Palestinians, the Zionist occupation announced the completion of a sensor-equipped underground wall on the site of Gaza. The Zionist defense minister said the technologically advanced project includes hundreds of cameras, radar, and other sensors over a stretch of 65 kilometers. Plans for the area were first announced in 2016 as a countermeasure developed after Hamas reinstance group used tunnels to blindside its troops in a 2014 war. The Saudi-led coalition fighting in Yemen said it had bombed military targets in the capital Sana'a after the Iran-aligned Houthis launched ballistic missiles and armed drones into Saudi Arabia, including the Aramco oil facilities in Jeddah. The tit-for-tat violence has escalated dramatically during the last month, despite efforts by the United States and the United Nations to engineer a ceasefire in this 7-year-old war that has caused a dire humanitarian crisis. One of the suspects of killing the Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi has been arrested on Tuesday in France by French police acting to a Turkish warrant. The arrested man, named Khalid Al-Utaybi, was about to board the plane from Paris to Riyadh. After identifying the identity of the suspect in the other part, Saudi officials announced that the arrested Saudi national was mistaken, and investigators in the case are still working on confirming and identity of the suspect. And for more news around the world, let's follow this report by Ayedi Osama.
Ants in the world continue to be the dominant image of the post-pandemic period, as continents differ, but issues are still spreading in all directions of the globe. Inflation rates in Europe are surging and prices are reaching high levels. However, The International Monetary Fund stated that this inflation is projected to remain weak, especially that the world is in a post-pandemic recovery phase. International Monetary Fund announced that fiscal framework should be renewed and reinforced so as to prevent any debt distress. The Indonesian President Joko Widodo promised on Tuesday to reinforce evacuation efforts and repair the damaged infrastructure that was destroyed following the eruption of the volcano, which left deaths and injured citizens. This comes at a time when thousands of people have been displaced and 22 others are missing. After sentencing the former leader Aung San Suu Kyi, who was convicted in ruling on Monday to be sentenced to 2 years for encouraging the breach of COVID-19 protocols. A day after, a senior Myanmar junta official along with Myanmar Information Minister stated that the detention of the former leader shows that no one was above the law and Myanmar's judicial system has no preference to anyone. A Kenyan police officer said at least 5 people were killed in an overnight disaster in the capital Nairobi before he shot himself dead. The Police Directorate of Criminal Investigations tweeted about the incident, saying that the officer first killed his wife in their home and shot her in the neck before leaving with his service-issued AK-47 rifle and started firing insanely at innocent members of the public. Angry residents later set tires on fire on a road in a protest against the violence.
And finally, we wrap up our English news edition with some sports news around the world in this report.
Liverpool made a perfect 6 Champions League wins from 6 on Tuesday with 2-1 victory at AC Milan, which knocked one of Europe's most storied club out of the Champions League. Fikayo Tomori had given Milan hope they could make the last 60th with his stop-in just before the half-hour mark at the San Siro. But a quick reply from Mohamed Salah and Divock Origi's noted finished 10 minutes after the break. In short, Jurgen Klopp's side finished Group B on 18 points. Kylian Mbappe and Lionel Messi both scored twice as the Paris Saint-Germain rounded out their Champions League group stage, camping with a 4-1 thumping of Club Brugge on Tuesday. Mbappe scored twice in the first 7 minutes, the second fastest burst at the start of the game in Champions League history, before setting up Messi to make it 3-0 at halftime. Atletico Madrid grabbed a place in the 60th of the Champions League as Antoine Griezmann scored 1 goal and had a key role in 2 others as the Spanish side beat Porto 3-1. The win in northern Porto, coupled with AC Milan's 2-1 defeat to a second-string Liverpool side at San Siro, was enough to send Diego Simeone's side through as the second-place team in the Group B, despite starting the day bottom.
And now it's time to have a reminder of our main top stories. Minister of Europe and Foreign Affairs of the French Republic, Jean-Yves Le Drian, has started a working visit to Algeria this morning to discuss bilateral relations. The rising tensions between Russia and Ukraine top the 2-hour high-stakes virtual conference between President Vladimir Putin and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden. Australian government follows the same footsteps of the United States and New Zealand in boycotting the next Olympic Games held in China. A Malaysian appeals court upheld former Prime Minister Najib Razak's guilty verdict in a case linked to corruption scandal. That's all from me, Nadia Kasmi, and the rest of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.